Hey everyone, I wanted to make a video going over the basics of the AWS CLI. And if you aren't familiar with the AWS CLI, it's just a command line interface for creating, managing, and destroying your AWS resources. And so anything you can do through the console, you can also do it through the CLI. And it's actually a lot quicker doing it through the CLI because you don't have to click through multiple pages and multiple windows. You can just do it all through a single command. So I always recommend people who want to get, more familiar with the cloud as well as AWS, definitely familiarize yourself with the AWS CLI because it's a really powerful tool and it's going to help save you a lot of time when it comes to managing your AWS resources. Installing the AWS CLI is very easy. All we have to do is just Google AWS CLI, and the first link should take us to the AWS page. And so, yeah, if you want to navigate directly to there, just go to aws.amazon.com/CLI, and you'll see that there's an installer for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So I'm going to walk you through all three of them. For the most part, it's really easy, and the steps are pretty much the same regardless of operating system. But there are a few nuances that I want to point out, so I'll walk you through each one step by step. We'll start off by doing the Windows first. So I have a 64-bit machine, so I'm going to just select that, and then you can do run or save. I'm just going to hit run, and eventually the installer should pop up. And so at this point, we can just keep hitting next. We will have to accept the terms and license agreement. And if you get this pop up, just go ahead and hit yes. All right, so we can hit finish. And now we want to verify that the CLI was installed properly. So go to the search bar down here and just search for CMD. And that's going to be our command prompt. So this is the Windows command line. And here, all you have to do is just type in AWS dash dash version. And at this point, you should see an output that looks fairly similar to this. So this is just confirming what version of AWS CLI that I'm running. So I'm running version 2.0.22. You may see a later version if you're watching this video in the future, but as long as you see this output, that means AWS CLI was installed properly. If you see any other output, it probably means something went wrong. So just probably repeat the steps and or close out your current terminal and then open up a new one. Sometimes that helps out as well. But that's all we had to do to get it installed on Windows. Let me show you guys how to do this on a Mac now. So to install this on a Mac, let's make sure we navigate to that same page. So just Google AWS CLI. And once we get to this page, we're going to select the Mac OS, the Mac OSS, the Mac OS PKG installer, and we'll hit allow. And you should see something download right there. So just click on the box, and we want to double click on the .pkg file. And so we can just keep hitting continue. And you will be prompted for your password. All right. And once that's done, open up your terminal. And here we're just going to type in AWS dash dash version. And so this should ideally, it'll do two things. It'll confirm if it was installed properly, and it'll let us know what version of the AWS CLI that we're using. And so just like in the Windows section, right, it's going to print out that I'm using version 2.0.22. And so when you see this output, that means your install went through and everything's good to go. If you see anything else, that probably means AWS CLI did not install properly. So go ahead and just repeat the steps, or just do some Googling to see, if you get some kind of error, just Google those errors, and most likely someone else has already hit it. And so there you go, guys. So that's all you have to do for a Mac setup. In the next video, I'm going to show you guys how to set this up on a Linux machine. To install AWS CLI on a Linux machine, all we have to do is just search for AWS CLI, and that should take us to the page with the downloads files. And so we'll click on the first link. If you ever want to navigate directly there, it's going to be aws.amazon.com/CLI. And on the right side right here, we can see that there's a Linux section, so we can just download the installer here. And you'll see that the steps for Linux is slightly different from the Mac and Windows. And so here, you have to select which type of machine you're using. So I'm using a Linux x86 64-bit. And so at this point, we can just copy this right here and then paste it into our terminal. And you'll see that I got a couple of errors. And that's because when we try to do this curl command, it says permission denied. And that's just because we need to run this with sudo. So what we want to do instead is just copy each line individually and then type in sudo and then paste that line in. And we're just going to do this for all 3 steps, making sure to do a sudo beforehand if you get an error. And then finally, we can do the last one. Oops, that already had sudo in there. All right, so now if we do an AWS -- version like it tells us to, that's going to confirm if it was installed properly. And so if you see an output that looks like this below, that means AWS CLI has been installed, and it's going to let you know what version you're running, which I am running version 2.0.22. All right, guys, so we've got AWS CLI installed. At this point, we can actually start working with our AWS resources. Well, we're almost ready to do that. We still have to set up our credentials, and I'll walk you through how to do that in the next video. Now that we have AWS CLI installed, the next step we have to perform is downloading our access keys from the AWS console. And so these keys are important because whenever we run a command from the AWS CLI, the CLI needs to know, what user are we trying to perform these commands with or as. And so we have to give it the access keys of a specific user so that it can actually use those credentials to call the backend API on AWS. And so to actually get our credentials, I want you to go to the AWS Management Console. So you can go to aws.amazon.com/console and just go to My Account and then AWS Management Console and then just log in. And once you're logged in, just go to the top right up here where you see your username and hit the drop down and go to My Security Credentials. And in this page, we want to select the access key section. And then there's this nice blue button right here that's going to allow us to create new access keys. So we'll hit that. And this is very important, guys. So we can only see our access keys once. And if you hit this show access key, this is going to be our access keys. And it's important to understand that, once we exit out of this right here, once I hit X, I will not be able to see my secret access key. So it's important that you, write these down, save them someplace. Amazon gives you an option of hitting this download key file. So if I hit download and then just save, it then saves it as a CSV file, so I can just open it up in a text editor. And these are going to be my credentials. So make sure you store them someplace safe. And however, if you do end up, losing your credentials, it's not a big deal because once we create these keys, we'll get an option to delete them. So you can just delete it and then just create a new access key. So it's not a big deal. But now that we have our access keys, what we want to do is we want to go to our terminal. And I'm doing this on a Windows, but just do this on a Mac or a Linux terminal if you are, on those operating systems. And the commands that I provide are for the most part going to be the same regardless of operating system. So if there are any differences, I'll make sure to point them out. And so what we want to do here is we want to type in AWS and then configure. And so here it's going to give us a few prompts to enter in our different access keys. So it's asking for the access key ID. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it in. And then it's asking for the AWS secret access key. So we'll take that and copy that. And then it's going to ask for a default region. And so if you don't know what a region is, you basically Amazon's got a couple of data centers, well, not just a couple, a decent amount of data centers scattered throughout the world. And each location for these data centers is going to be a separate region. And if you, let me see where I can find this. Let me go back to my account. Or let me go into services and then EC2. And so you can see right up here, it says Northern Virginia. So this is the default region that I get associated with. And Amazon just picks whatever region or data center is geographically closest to you. So I'm on the East Coast of the United States. And so Northern Virginia data center, or what it refers to as EUS East 1 region, is going to be my default region. However, I can actually select any region to work with. And I can actually deploy resources into any one of these regions. But this prompt is just asking, what do you want the default region to be if we ever run a command and we don't specify what region we want to, deploy a resource to? So I'm just going to do US East 1 because that's where I deploy most of my things. But if you live someplace else, you may want to pick whatever region is closest to you. And then default output format. So when we run commands, it's going to spit out some output, and there's several different options of how you want those outputs printed out. You can get it in a JSON format, you can get it in YAML format, you can get it in text, and you can actually see all the options here in the documentation. So if we go to documentation, and I think it's under user guide, and let's see, is it installing or configuring AWS? I think it's here. Let's see. Here we go. So output format. So if you can click on this configuring the AWS CLI, you'll see the different output formats that we have. So we've got JSON, YAML, text, and table. I like my defaults to be JSON, but feel free to pick whichever one you feel most comfortable with. I'm just going to do JSON. Now at this point, we're done with our configuration, and we technically should be able to run the AWS CLI commands, and it should be able to automatically log in into our account and perform those actions. But when we run AWS configure, I want to actually kind of explain to you what it did. And so if you're on a Windows, I want you to navigate to your home directory. So generally your prompt is already going to take you to your home directory. However, if you don't know how to get there and it took you someplace else, it's always C drive /users and then the name of your user. And we can actually navigate to it using the file explorer. And so if I hit this PC, C drive, users, and then my username, you'll see that it created this .aws folder right here. And if we click on that, there's going to be two different files. There's going to be a config file and a credentials file. And so when we ran AWS configure, it went ahead and created those two files for us. And we can just take a look at them real quick. So let's go to the configure one. I'm just going to open this up in Notepad. And if you take a look at the configs, you'll see there's just a couple of lines. So there's this top line that says default, which I'll explain what that is in a second. And then we've got the region. So you remember we specify what our default region is. So that's going to be US East 1. And then our output format is going to be JSON. And our credentials, I'm sure you can already guess what's going to be in here. But we can see that, once again, it has this default, which I'm going to explain in a second or two. And then it's got our access keys that we provided. So Amazon is going to look into that .aws folder to get all this information so that when you run commands, it knows what configuration settings to use, as well as what access credentials. Now, just to quickly show you Mac users and Linux users how to get to that .aws folder, because it's a little bit different, but pretty much the same though on these machines. So if you're on a Mac or Linux, the steps are exactly the same. You want to go to your home directory, and on a Linux or a Mac machine, the easiest way to get to your home directory is just do a CD and then do the little tilde. Okay, that's going to take you to your home directory. And if you want to know the exact path, it's going to be /users and then the name of your user. So it's pretty much the same as a Windows machine, just no C drive. And if we do an ls, you'll see that there is no .aws folder, but that's just because that's a hidden folder. So if you do ls-la, you should then see, oh, well, I didn't actually run AWS configure. So let me run that real quick. So AWS configure. I'm just going to type in some garbage. Okay, and so now if we do an ls -la, we should see a .aws folder get created. So we can move into there. And in there, we should see the same two files. And if we take a look at those files, you'll see the same thing. We've got the default, and then we've got our region and our output, and our credentials is going to be the same thing. Okay, and so this is the same for a Linux machine. Okay, so let me now go back to my Windows machine, actually, because that's what I feel most comfortable with. And let me explain to you what this default is. So this is referred to as the default profile. And a profile in AWS CLI world is really just a collection of settings and credentials that you can apply to an AWS CLI command. And so when we run commands on the AWS CLI, they're going to take these configurations and these credentials and use them when we run that command. However, we can set up other profiles if we wanted to. So we don't just have to use the default profile. The default profile is just a special profile because it's going to be the default one if we don't specify a specific profile in our command. However, if we wanted to make a special profile, I can just call this Sanjeev, right? I can then give him his own, access key, dot dot dot, and then my own AWS secret, and I can even specify other configurations that I might prefer. So if I wanted, uh, interesting thing though, actually, so here you just specify the name of the profile, but when you're under the config folder, you have to do profile and then the name of the profile. So Sanjeev. So you want to make sure it matches. So you don't need the word profile here, but you need the word profile here. And then here I could say my region. Let's say I want my region to be US West 1, US West 2, and then output, maybe I want YAML. And so now I have a default profile and a profile named Sanjeev that I can use. And so anytime I run an AWS command, I can always pass in the -- profile flag and then specify, oh, I want to use the Sanjeev profile. However, if I do not include a profile flag or a profile option in my command, it's just going to take the default configuration and the default credentials. In the last video, I showed you guys how to set up your access keys so that AWS CLI can use them. However, some people may not like storing their credentials, on their machine like that. It could be considered a security vulnerability, and so there are other options that you can use to set up your authentication for AWS CLI, and one of those is using environment variables. And so this is something I'm sure you guys are already familiar with, but we can actually define these environment variables to hold all of our access keys, and then AWS CLI will check with them directly to get those values. And the nice part about storing it in an environment variable is that there's no document really that's storing it on our machine. Like there's no file that has those values. The only way to do that is to actually just run the command to print out all your environment variables. So it's a little bit more secure than storing it, in that credentials file in your AWS folder. And I'm just going to quickly walk you through how to do that. But I definitely recommend you check out the documentation because, even after I explain this, I'm sure at some point you're going to forget it. And it's much easier to just go to the documents and quickly read it and copy and paste these commands instead of, coming back to this video. And so under the AWS command line interface user guide, this is the direct link. You just want to click on under configure the AWS CLI. You want to select environment variables. And they've got solid documentation. So you can see the different commands that you have to do to define all of your credentials as well as your default region. And so this is pretty much just copy and paste. So you just copy all of this. Well, this is for Mac, so I'll show you how to do this on Windows real quick. But you would just copy this value right here, and then you go to your command line. Why can't I paste? I guess I didn't copy it. And then you put in whatever your access keys are that you got from your AWS console, right? So that's all you have to do. I'm not going to actually do that right now because I already have it saved in the file and I don't want it to overwrite that. And you just do the same steps for all three of these. And I don't know how to actually verify if an environment variable is set on Windows machine. I wonder if you could just do set x, set. Yeah. So if you type in the word set, it's going to show you all of your environment variables. So once you run these commands, just run a set, and then you can just verify if it actually worked. On a Linux machine, we can just go there. So let me go to my Mac machine. So Mac and Linux once again are exactly the same. So to set the environment variables, let me go to the documentation on this guy, and we can set it on this machine. So this is just a virtual machine. And so here, we can literally just copy this. And you obviously want to put in your own credentials. Don't copy the one from the AWS documentation. But once you hit enter, if you do a print NV and then do a pipe grep AWS, you should see that new environment variable that you saved. And then once you do the next one, you should also see that one as well. And so now if we do a print NV, pipe grep AWS, we can see that these access keys. And so now AWS CLI can just use these values to connect. So it's a little bit safer than storing in a file. However, if you reload, you'll see that these environment variables will get deleted and you'll have to redo it. But it's kind of like logging in every time you reboot. Not a big deal. And there's actually ways to get that to persist by saving these environment variables in your bash rc file. However, at that point, you're saving your credentials in a file, and so it's not quite as secure. And if you're going to save it in a file, you might as well just save it in your AWS credentials file. All right, guys. So now that we've got everything set up, and if we can connect to AWS, I want to start getting you guys familiarized with the AWS CLI command structure. And the basic structure of a AWS CLI command is going to be listed on this page. So if you're not here on this page, I recommend you pull it up. You just go to the user guide and then go under using the AWS CLI and then command structure. And you'll see that every command starts with AWS. And then we have a command, a subcommand, and then as many options and parameters that we want. Okay. And just to kind of give you an example of what that would look like, if you go under, let's see, under this section right here, under Amazon EC2 KeyPairs, you'll see an example of a command. So you've got AWS, you've got the main command, you've got the subcommand, and then you see all of these options and flags that are being passed in. So that's the basic structure of a command. It's not very complicated. However, it can be hard to kind of remember, what are the different commands and subcommands that we have at our disposal? What are the different options we have? So if you go up to this getting help section right here, you'll see the CLI has a lot of tools to kind of make our lives a little bit easier. And one of the main ones is using the help option. So we can always do an AWS help. And it's kind of almost like a man page for the AWS CLI. And so we can just kind of space through all of the options that we have at our disposal. We can see all of the different services that the CLI provides and helps us manage. And you can even go under a specific command like EC2, which if you don't know, it's used for managing EC2 resources. And we can do a help here and we can see all of the different subcommands that we have. So if we want to associate an address, we can do that, associate a private IP address. If we want to attach a volume, attach a VPN gateway. So we can see all of the options that we have under the EC2 command. But I think that's enough of that. What I want to do now is I want to walk you through deploying a resource, and we're going to do it first through the AWS console, which I'm sure you guys are like, oh, we already know how to do that. But I want to show you how the steps that you perform on the AWS console and how they map to the AWS CLI. So I think that's important. So let's go to the AWS command to our console. And so log into your console, go to the EC2 dashboard, and then hit running instances. So I've technically got one running instance. But what I want to do is I want to just launch a new instance. And here you'll see that we have all of the different AMIs. And so I'm just going to select the first main one, which is the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. And you'll see that the AMI has a unique ID. And this is important once we get into the AWS CLI. But this is basically telling Amazon, what image we want to use to deploy our EC2 instance. So we'll select that. We then select the instance size. So we're going to stick with free tier, which is a T2 micro. But, we obviously have all of these sizes that we can use, with the ones down here being a lot more expensive and a lot faster and higher performing. So at this point, we can technically go into configure instance details to, modify other settings and configuration parameters for this EC2 instance. But for now, I'm just going to review and launch. And here we can hit launch, and it's going to ask us to choose a existing key pair. And you may not have one already. So these I've actually manually created. And so what I want to do is before we actually deploy this, just keep in mind that we actually do need to have a key pair. And I'm not sure if it gives you a default one. It may not. So let me quickly walk you through how to set up a key pair. And so we're just going to cancel out of this for now. And under the EC2 dashboard, just scroll on down to key pairs under network and security. And you'll see I have these two key pairs, but if you just made a new account, most likely you won't have any. So we'll just hit create key pair. And so now we can create our key pair, and I'm just going to call this test one. And just to signify that we made this through the console, I'm just going to type in -console, but the name doesn't matter. And then we can choose between a PPK file and a PEM file. So, if you're on a Linux or a Mac machine, you'll probably want the PEM. If you're on a Windows machine, you want the PPK. However, if you do download a PEM for Windows, there's obviously ways to convert it. It's not a big deal. So we can create this key pair. And so we've got this key pair, and you'll see that it downloaded the PPK file or the PEM file if you selected that. So we can use this to log into EC2 instances once we deploy them. But I just wanted to walk you through setting that up. So now we can go back to the EC2 dashboard and deploy our EC2 instance again. So we'll do the same steps. I'll select the Amazon Linux 2 AMI, T2 micro, review and launch. And when we do launch, we can now select that new key pair. So test one console. You have to acknowledge that, and then we'll launch the instance. So Amazon's launching that. We can go to view instances to take us back to the EC2 dashboard, and you can see the one that's pending is the one that we just deployed. And so that's going to deploy now. And hopefully you guys kind of understand what we do, what we need and what information we need to deploy a EC2 instance at the bare minimum, right? So we obviously need an AMI. We need a instance size. So the AMI was the Linux AMI, and the instance size was the T2 micro, and then we need a key pair. Okay, and so these are all things that we need if we're going to deploy it from the AWS CLI. And so that's why I wanted to walk you through how to do it through the console. But now let's go ahead and actually run our first AWS CLI command. And we'll start off by creating a key pair within the AWS CLI. So let's go to the command line interface. Let's go to the user guide. It actually walks us through how to do that. So if we scroll down to using the AWS CLI with AWS, go under Amazon EC2 and EC2 key pair, it's going to show us how to create a key pair. So, we start off with AWS, we type in EC2, and then the subcommand is create key pair, and then we have to give it a parameter of key name or an option of key name. And then the other two are just there so that, we can actually save it to our computer, because we don't just want to create a key pair, we want to actually save that PEM file onto our machine. And so we're going to just copy this exactly, and this should work on a Windows or a Mac machine. The only time it won't work is if you're using the Windows PowerShell, which is a little different than the command line tool. I don't actually use the PowerShell, but it is available. And so if you're using the PowerShell, you want to make sure you copy the second line. But we can take this, and I can just paste it in, and make sure you don't copy the $sign. You don't want that. And feel free to change any of the details. So if you want to save this to a different file, so we'll call this my awesome key pair. And then the key name we want to store on AWS. Generally, you want them to match so that you know which one maps to which one. But technically, you can call it whatever you want. But let's just call it the same thing. So we'll call this my awesome key pair. And then we can hit enter. And so now if I do a dir, which is going to show me all of the files on my machine, or let's just go to the file explorer. And so here under user Sanjeev, I saved it. And so you can see my awesome key pair. So this created a key pair on AWS, and it downloaded the PEM file onto this machine. And if we go back to our console, we can verify if it actually did that. So we'll go to KeyPairs, and we'll probably have to hit refresh. And so now you can see I misspelled it, but you can see that the AWS CLI created this key pair for us. All right, guys. So that was your first AWS command, and you'll see that working with the CLI is very simple. It's pretty much just that. AWS, your command, your subcommand, and then a bunch of different options that you got to pass in. And what flags and options you need to pass in? Well, you gotta go to the documentation, right? So there's a reference guide. Let me see where this is the reference guide here. So if you go to, awscli.amazonaws.com, v2 documentation, and then all of that, I don't feel like saying all of that. And then you can then search for EC2, and then under EC2, you'll see all of the subcommands. So we want create key pair, and then you'll see all of the flags and options that we have for this subcommand. But going back to the user guide, there are a few other things that we can do from the CLI. So instead of having to go to the console to verify that we successfully created a key pair, we can actually do that through the CLI. And so we can do AWS EC2 describe key pairs. And so here you can see that they're passing in the key name. If we don't pass in a key name, it's going to list all of the key pairs. So that's what I'm going to do. We'll do AWS EC2 describe -key -pairs. And so for me, it printed out the 3 or 4 different key pairs that I have. So I've got main key, I've got my awesome key pair, I've got Sanjeev, and then test one console. All right. And, once again, with the CLI, anything we can do in the console, we can do in the CLI. And actually, I don't know if this is the case for AWS, but I know for Azure, there's actually some things that you can only do through the CLI that you can't do through the console. I don't know why they ended up doing it like that, but, maybe Amazon is the same way. I'm not sure. So, that's why I always recommend learning the CLI because a lot of times it can be significantly more powerful. And you'll see it's a lot quicker than just having to click buttons through the console. But let's go ahead and delete a key pair. So I'm gonna pick our my awesome key pair to delete. So we'll do AWS EC2 delete dash key dash pair, and then we have to pass in the key dash name parameter, and then we'll just copy this name right here. Okay, so now we can go back to the console and verify, but we don't need to do that because we know how to verify through the CLI. So we can just do AWS EC2 describe key pairs. And there you go, guys. It's gone now. All right, so we've created a key pair on your machine now, hopefully. If you deleted it, go ahead and make it again because we're going to deploy an EC2 instance. I want to make sure you have a key pair before you do that. And so in the user guide, the next step is going into EC2 instances. And this is going to show us how to create an EC2 instance using the AWS CLI. So you can see that there's AWS, the command is EC2 once again, but now we have a run instance subcommand. And if you look at the flags that you have to pass in or the parameters, you'll see that they kind of make sense because it's pretty much exactly what we were doing from the console. So we have to pass in image ID, which is the AMI ID. And if you already forgot what that is or where to get that, just go back to instances. And then if you want to verify what the AMI is of a specific instance that you're running, you can just click on it and you'll see the the AMI ID right here. And you can click on that and you can just copy this ID. However, if you want to kind of look through the marketplace and see the different AMIs, you can search here. So if you want, I don't know, a Windows AMI, you can search for that. And this is going to be the AMI ID for a Windows 2019 server. But we'll grab this AMI right here. So we want to deploy the same Amazon Linux to AMI. And we'll go back to the user guide. And let's just follow along. So here it's passing an account of 1. That's optional. I think it defaults to 1. But if you wanted to deploy 5 really quickly, you would just do -- count 5. Then we have to specify the instance type, which is T2 micro. So that's a requirement. And then you pass in the key name that you have created so that you can actually log into the device. And then here you can see they're passing in a security group ID. And so, every instance has to be associated with a security group. I don't know if I actually have any security groups, and I don't know if there's a default one. But before I kind of proceed further, let me make sure that there isn't a default, if there is a default security group or not. And so it looks like there is a default security group that comes with our VPC. So I don't think we should have to pass in a security group, and it should automatically just default to that. So that should be fine. Let's go back to the user guide and let's actually try to create an EC2 instance. And so we'll do AWS EC2 run - instances. And then we want -- image - ID. And I can't remember if I copied the AMI. So let's go back. And I'm just going to copy this AMI. And don't copy mine because yours may actually be a different one because every region, for some reason, they flip the AMI IDs from region to region. I don't know why they do that. So make sure you actually follow these steps and copy it from your own machine if you're on a different region. All right. And so other flags, we need the instance type, of course. So -- instance - type. And this is going to be a T2.micro. And then we want to pass in a key name. So -- key - name. And so just make sure you grab one of the keys that you currently have. So I'm just going to copy this Sanjeev right here. And if you don't remember, just do the Amazon EC2, AWS EC2 describe KeyPairs command, and that's going to print out all of them. So I'll paste that in there. And, like I said, we can use the default security group. So you don't technically have to pass it in, but if you did have a specific security group you want to associate with that EC2 instance, make sure you pass that in. And so let's hit enter and run. And it looks like I messed something up. So let's see. Okay, so it looks like I copied the wrong AMI. So for some reason, when I do the 64-bit ARM, one, it gives me an error, but when I do the 64-bit x86, it doesn't. So I'll probably have to do a little research on why that didn't work. But anyways, just go ahead and just copy the 64-bit one. And then so now when you run that command, we can see that it prints out a whole bunch of output. And so all of this output is information about the instance it just created. So we can see the image ID. We can see the instance ID that Amazon gave it. So it's got a few other details regarding the device, like the instance type, the key name, launch time. We can see the availability zone that went to the US East 1E. And we've got, the VPC ID. So it's going to give us all the information about that device. And if we go back to our console, and if I cancel and exit out of this, we could see the new instance that it just deployed right here. And so you can see it's initializing it right now, but we have successfully deployed a EC2 instance using the AWS CLI, and you can see just how quick and powerful the AWS CLI is. Now I've showed you how to create a key pair, how to delete a key pair, how to create an instance. Let me show you how to modify an existing resource. So what we'll do is we'll take this instance that we just deployed using the AWS CLI, and we'll give it a new tag. Okay, so we'll give it a name tag so that we can see a nice pretty name so that we know, what this instance is and what it's being used for. And once again, to do that, I recommend you go to the documentation, and there's actually a section on this. So if we just keep scrolling down a bit, adding a tag to your instance. So what we want to do is we do the AWS EC2 command, but now we use the subcommand of create tags. And then we have to pass in a flag of or parameter of -- resource, and then give the resource ID. And we can get that, from the output that we just got. And then we pass in all the tags we want to give it. And so we'll do that step by step. So to get the instance ID right, that's just right up here. However, if you already lost this output, or if for some reason, you closed out your command line, you don't have the information, and you don't want to log back in to the console, we can actually run a command to see all of our running instances. And just like with the key pairs, remember we had the describe instances subcommand. We can do the same thing for EC2. So we can do AWS EC2 and then describe -instances. And it's going to print out information regarding all of our instances. And you'll probably only see one if you've just deployed one. And let's just say we want the -- instance IDs, because I don't want all of that information. Well, it looks like it's going to print all of the information. But anyways, let's just grab the instance ID of one of our machines. It doesn't really matter which one. I'm just going to copy that. And let's create a tag now. So here we go to AWS EC2, create -tags, and then -- resource. Then paste in the instance ID. And then now let's give it, actually this window is probably a little annoying for you guys. So let me just kind of minimize that. And so now we can kind of work on it side by side. So once we have the instance ID, we can then go ahead and create our tags. So we'll do AWS EC2 create -tags, then -- resource, and then paste the instance ID. Then we do -- tags and then give it a whole bunch of tags. And so the first thing we have to do is provide the key for the tag. So we'll do key equals, and then I'm going to call this tag a name, or the key is going to be name, and then we have to assign it a value. And the value is going to equal, how about my first instance? So let's hit enter. And now let's go back to the console and let's take a look to see if it got updated. So if I hit refresh, look at that. You can see we gave this instance a tag of my first instance. So this is a special tag, the name tag, which will allow us to kind of see the name right here. But if we click on this instance and go to tags, you can see all of the tags that got assigned. So we just had the name and then my first instance. So that's how you can add tags and modify a pre-existing resource using the AWS CLI. All right, guys. So to kind of wrap up this section with deploying and modifying and working with the EC2 instances altogether, I want to show you guys how to kind of clean up the mess that we've made in AWS and show you how to delete our instances as well as delete our key pair just so that we can clean up everything in our AWS environment so that hopefully we don't get, any unnecessary bills. And, this is obviously a skill you need to have whether you do it through the console or through the CLI. So let's figure out how to actually delete an EC2 instance. And so what we're going to do is we're going to delete the EC2 instance that we gave that name tag. And the way to do that is, well, let's check the documentation. And so if we go to the command line reference, so if you go to docs.aws.amazon.com, CLI/index.com, you want to go to this CLI reference. And it says, right here that we're viewing version 1 of the AWS CLI, and we're actually using version 2, so we want to click that and go there. And then here, we want to just scroll down and look for EC2. And we want to look for something that looks like a delete or a terminate. And I already know off the top of my head it's a terminate, so we want terminate instances. And so this is a pretty easy command, just like everything we've worked with. You just do AWS EC2 terminate -instances and then -instance -IDs, and then you can pass in as many instances as you want. So if you wanted to delete, multiple EC2 instances, you can do it all with one command. And so let's do that, and we'll do AWS EC2. What was it? Terminate -instances and then --instance -ID. Actually, was it it's IDs with an S. And so now I've got 2 running instances, so I'm going to terminate both of them. And so we'll copy this instance ID right here, and you can click this copy to clipboard. I'm going to paste that in there, and then let me grab this one as well. I'm going to paste that in there as well. And let's run that. And so it gave us some output letting us know it's going to shut it down and then, I guess, terminate it. But if we hit refresh here, we can see that it's in a shutting down state. So it'll get shut down, and then once it's shut down, it'll then terminate both of these EC2 instances. And so that's how you delete an EC2 instance. And let's also clear out our key pairs. So we've got a couple of key pairs. And so let's delete these through the CLI. And once again, we're probably going to have to use the documentation. So let's go to the reference page, and we want, let's see, key pair. Let's see if there's anything. Create key pair, delete key pair. This is probably the one we want. And so we just do delete key pair -- key name and then the name of the key pair. And I'm just going to delete test1 - console. All right. And no output was sent. So I'm not really sure if it went through or not, but we can always hit refresh. Or even better, let's do uh, let's print out all of our key pairs. So if we hit the up arrow key, we can see all the commands that we ran. And there should be the command that we already ran, describe -key -pairs. So that should show us all of our key pairs. And so you can see here, we just have main key and Sanjeev. So we deleted test1 console, and we can verify that in the console as well. And so now we just have these 2 key pairs. All right, guys. So now we just deleted a couple of EC2 instances as well as our key pair. And so, hopefully so far you guys are learning a lot about the AWS CLI and getting more comfortable with it. In the next section, I'm not really sure what we're going to cover. Probably start covering like S3 or something like that. Because EC2 and S3 are usually the 2 main services that people always like to use with Amazon. So I definitely want to cover that in this crash course. In this section, we're going to start using Amazon's S3 storage, which is their cloud storage offering. And so, just like we did with EC2 instances, we're going to start off by using the console and then just see what steps are required to, create a bucket, to copy files over to a bucket and things like that. And then we'll delete all of that and then we'll figure out how to do it through the console so that once again, we can kind of map how those two are essentially doing the same thing, just in a different way. And so if you haven't already done so, click on services and navigate to S3. And so if you don't feel like searching for it, you can always just do S3 and it should be the first result. And so here, what we need to do is create a bucket. We'll create a bucket and we got to give it a unique name. I'm going to give it, we'll call this pizza and wings, pizza dash wings. And it's got to be a unique name. So if anyone else has the name that you're trying to use, it's going to error out. And so select your region. So I just use my default region, hit next. I usually just skip all that, hit next, and then block all public access. That's fine for now. And then we'll create our bucket. And so now we've got our S3 bucket and we can go in there and now we can, upload files, create folders and things like that. So let's upload a file real quick. And so we'll add a file and I don't really have many files on this machine. So I'll just upload my PEM file. Don't really see why you'd ever want to, but just for demonstration purposes, we'll upload that. Hit next. You're going to get a few options. I usually just keep hitting next and leave everything as default. And so we've got our file now in our bucket and we can even create folders. So we'll say test folder. And if we want, we can, move this. I think we can move this. Yeah, move. And then we can move this. Can we move this into a folder? I don't remember how to do that through the CLI. I can't drag it. Now it's got to be through here. It says I don't have a folder. Maybe I have to hit refresh. No. Here we go. Yeah, I just had to refresh. So now we have the option of selecting the test folder. We'll hit choose, and then now we can move it into that test folder. So we've now moved it into there. And yeah, that's kind of all I really wanted to show you. I mean, we have the option of selecting this, and then we can download it. So we can download as, and then just download it as a file. Other options are, we can delete a file, and we can go back to the parent directory. We can delete our folder. And then finally, let's go back to S3 and let's just delete our bucket. And to confirm a delete, you have to just type in the name of your bucket. So that's kind of what we can do through the console, playing around with buckets. Obviously, there's a lot of options that you can do. You can do versioning, you can do security and things like that on your bucket. But the core concept of S3 is just managing your files. So let's figure out how we can do all of that through the command line. And so if you don't already have the documentation, go ahead and pull that up. So if you do AWS CLI and documentation, user guide, and they've got some great examples. If you go under using AWS CLI with AWS services and then select S3 and then high level S3 commands. And so we've deleted everything, hopefully. And, let's start off by just listing out all of the buckets we have. So right now you shouldn't have any unless, you've already been playing around with AWS. But to print out the list of all of your buckets, you can do an AWS S3 LS. And that's going to list out all of your buckets. And so you can see here, we don't have any buckets at the moment. And so let's go ahead and create a bucket. And the way to create the bucket is by using the MB subcommand, which I think stands for make bucket. We'll do AWS S3 MB, and then S3:// then the name of the bucket. So we'll do pizza dash wings again. All right, so it made that bucket, and we can do an AWS S3 LS to confirm that. And so now we've got our bucket. And if we want to print out the contents of our bucket, we can do an AWS S3 LS and then S3:// pizza dash wings. And it prints out nothing because there's no actual files or folders inside that bucket because we just made it. But taking a look at the documentation, you can obviously print out the contents of the entire bucket or a specific folder within your bucket, so that you can really see whatever you want to see. We'll come back to deleting the bucket later. Let's play around with our bucket now. So one of the things you want to do is copy files from your local machine over to your S3 bucket, and so we use the CP command to do that. So you do AWS S3 CP, then the source of the file, and then the destination of the file. And then let's ignore grants for now. Let's keep it simple. So let's see what files I have. If I do a dir or just look at the file explorer, I can see all of the different files I have. And right now I'm in my Sanjeev folder. And so I've got these two key pairs. So let's upload those again. So I can do AWS S3 CP, then the full path to get to those files. And so I'm already in that folder. So I can just do, my keypair.pem, and then I want to copy it to my S3 bucket. And we'll copy it to pizza-wings. And if I hit enter at this point, it's just going to send it to the root directory of my bucket. However, if I also wanted to create some folders, I can create, let's say my PEM folder. Great. And so now it should have created that folder and moved that file, which was on my local machine, onto that folder. So first of all, let's verify in the console. And there should be a refresh button. So here we've got the bucket it created. Go in there. We can see the PEM folder. And if we go in there, we can see my key pair. And, once again, we can obviously do this through the CLI. So we'll do AWS S3 ls S3:// We can do pizza-wings. So you can see that folder, but if you wanted to go in that folder, we can do that as well. And so we can see now my key pair. That's cool and all, but I think where S3 gets really powerful is using the sync functionality. So you can sync a folder really quickly with one command to your AWS. Oh, and even the other way around. So you can actually sync your AWS to a folder on your local machine. So let me show you how to do that. And let's say we want to basically sync whatever is in the downloads folder on my machine to AWS. Okay, well, to do that, we do AWS S3 sync, and then we provide the source and the target. So we want the source to be our downloads folder, and the target is going to be S3 colon what was it? I think it was S3 colon // and then pizza-wings. And so now it would just sync it to the root directory, but I want to create a separate folder. So I'll say we'll call it downloads-backup. And so you can see here, it synced all of the files and folders that were inside my downloads directory and placed them into the downloads-backup folder within my bucket. And so there was 4 different files. And if I go to my management console, go back to pizza and wings, hit refresh, you can see the downloads and backup folder got generated, and you can see the 4 files that was in my downloads directory. And let's just make sure those were the files that were actually in there. And so, you can see the 4 files, and it looks like there's a hidden file that it also copied over. Great. Now, let's create a new folder, and I'll just call this a test folder. And let's sync it again and see what happens. So if we run the same command, it looks like it didn't do anything. But I think that just may be because I have no files in there. So if I create a new file in there now, inside my test folder, I'll just call this test file. If I now do a sync, it now uploaded that file and also created that folder. And there's our test folder, and there's our test file. However, here's the interesting thing. Let's say we delete that file now. And I'm going to delete this guy. And if I do a sync now, I want you to try to figure out what's going to happen, right? You're probably thinking that it should delete the file, but you can see nothing changed. And if I hit a refresh here, nothing happened. The file still exists. And if you take a look at our documentation, that's actually the expected behavior. So if you want to sync the folders and delete files that got deleted as well from your local machine, then you actually have to pass in a flag so that it actually syncs and deletes files. So by default, it won't delete the files, and you have to pass in the dash dash delete flag. So let's try that now, dash dash delete. And so now it deleted the test file. We can just double check, and that file's gone. Perfect. Now let's say we accidentally, went into our downloads directory and deleted all of these, right? And we're like, oh no, what do we do? Well, since we are backing up this folder, we can do a sync, but in the opposite direction. So we take all of the files in AWS and copy it to our local machine. And the command's exactly the same. The only difference is we flip the source and the target. So this is going to be the source and this is going to be the target. All right. And now look at that, guys. See, we copied all of those files from AWS onto our local machine. All right. So the next command we should probably take a look at is the rm command. So that's how we delete a file on S3. So we can do AWS S3 RM, and then you just have to give it the path to the file that you want to delete. So we'll do sync, not sync, S3 colon / pizza dash wings. And then let's just pick a file to delete. So hit refresh. Let's delete rootkey.csv. So this is going to be in downloads dash backup and then rootkey.csv. And I misspelled that. Oh, what's happening here? And I misspelled pizza. Gotta get the two Z's. All right, so let's hit refresh and make sure this file goes away. There you go, guys. So now we deleted a file. We also have the option of moving files as well. And so we can move a file in AWS from one directory to another, or we can even move files between our machine and AWS. So, till now we've been copying files, but we can also move them as well. And so as an example, let me go to my downloads directory. And I'm going to just delete everything for now. All right. And let's see what happens when we do a move. So we'll do AWS S3 move or MV, sorry. And then we want to move from S3 to our machine. So we'll do S3 colon / pizza dash wings / downloads dash backup. And we want to copy test one dash console.ppk. And we want to move it to our current directory. And the way to do current directory is a dot. Okay. And so here, if we hit refresh, you can see the file's gone. So it wasn't a copy. We didn't copy it to a machine. We physically moved it. And now if I go to our file explorer, we can see that the file is here. And we can do this in the opposite direction. So we can move files from our machine to AWS S3. And so all we have to do is AWS S3, copy the test one, and we want to move that to this path. Whoops, what happened here? I forgot the MV subcommand. All right, and so if I do a dir just to see the contents of this directory, you can see there's no files. There's no files. It's because I moved it to AWS. Hit refresh, and we can now see the files up there in AWS. All right, and so that's most of the things I wanted to cover. I guess the last thing is let's go ahead and let's delete our bucket. So that's the final thing to show you guys. And it's good to clean things up when you're just learning so that you don't get unnecessarily charged. So to delete a bucket, it's just AWS S3 RB, then the name of the bucket. So we'll do AWS S3 RB S3 colon pizza dash wings, and it's going to fail. That's expected. And that's because our bucket is not empty. By default, Amazon will not let you delete a bucket unless it is empty. However, we can pass in the dash dash force flag, and that's going to make sure that the bucket gets deleted regardless of what its contents are. So we'll hit the up arrow and then just do dash dash force. And you can see deleting the files and then removing the bucket. So if we go back to our console, well, actually, let's check on the CLI first, AWS S3 LS, and we've got no buckets. And if we go back to S3, hit refresh, no buckets. There you have it, guys. So I think that's all I'm going to cover in this crash course. I plan to make more videos on AWS as well as the AWS CLI. And so if you guys want me to cover any specific topics, let me know and I'll be happy to make a video. Just either message me or yeah, post a comment. I don't know if I'll actually read the comments, but yeah, just find some way to reach out to me. Let me know what you guys want me to cover and I'll be happy to do so.